Thanks everyone for joining us. We're talking about direct to consumer, and even though we're talking about this today, this is not a new topic. And I say this to everybody I meet because this is a topic that we've been trying to, from my perspective, engage with for the last 5 to 7 years. So, as Vincent's talked about my background, I, am in consulting and I work with consumer goods industries and retailers globally. And consumer goods and retailers have been talking about direct to consumer for the last 10 years. And in the last 10 years, and at the risk of aging myself, if you go back to the mid 90s, 95, 96, most of us were around when Dell came into its own. And that's really the start of the direct to consumer. I mean, the direct to consumer model existed in the 90s, it existed in the 2000s. I think what's happened at the back of COVID is that it's got accelerated to the point where it's becoming very difficult for companies that have been in traditional, have been following route to market models, which are largely traditional, to stop ignoring it and to do something about it. Having said so, there is a whole ecosystem of companies that were born in the digital space, that have grown up in the digital space, that have no other way of existing than in the direct to consumer world. So we are at this really interesting juncture where there are companies that are ridden with legacy technology, that are a lot of legacy business and are looking to pivot towards becoming more direct, getting more closer to their consumers. And there are companies that Arvind mentioned in his conversation that have always been around and they grew up in this whole age, right? So it's coming together of what we are now calling a direct to consumer channel. As we go forth, I also want to make sure that we all are on the same page as to what direct to consumer means. Because direct to consumer, as many understand, is not just e-commerce. I think direct to consumer and e-commerce get mixed together. I've also heard people talk about how e-commerce has led to the rise of direct to consumer. The truth is, e-commerce is a strategy within direct to consumer. It's a way of establishing your presence and getting closer to your consumer. It is not just direct to consumer. A fully functional direct to consumer business is not just leveraging technologies that helps you get closer to your consumer, but has the right kind of infrastructure and piping, or what we call logistics and supply chain, which are enabled to run in the direct to consumer space. It has brands which appeal to both online and offline audiences and can be manufactured for both offline and online audiences. It has engagement with consumers, not just by means of establishing the e-commerce contact, but it has various other touch points, whether through social media, whether through other forms of engagement, both offline and online, which enable the consumer to consume it, to come close to it, to be able to experience it in an offline and an online manner. So for me, the direct to consumer is a route to market, is a way of getting your brand into the market, which previously, you would have heard terms like general trade, modern trade, e-commerce, or omni-channel. This is a route to market channel. It enables you to get your product, your brand in front of consumers. And in doing so, it throws up challenges and opportunities that can be enabled and addressed by technology, by data, and by upskilling and reskilling of people. Now, before I go on to it, I want to talk, if you can go on to the next slide, I really want to talk about, this global study that IBM does every year. And if you just click on it again, there is a global study that IBM does. I think the graphics are not coming up for whatever reason in Zoom. Can you please go back for a minute again? Yeah. There is a world map here that you're supposed to see. So imagine there is a world map where nothing's coming up. But we survey around 20,000 consumers across 30 countries. And the purpose of this study is to really understand what consumers the world over are thinking, and then enable our clients, in the consumer, in the financial services, in the retail, in other sectors, to be able to commit to strategies which are more consumer centric. Now, we talk to consumers, about 35% of them are in our own region of Asia. And as we talk to them, and this latest study happened in 2020, just as we were in COVID, and if you go on to the next slide, 3 things emerged. First, as we've gone through it ourselves as consumers, the shopping behavior is fundamentally changed. There has been a debate on TV, in the press, about, is this change in shopping behavior permanent? Is it here to stay, or is it temporary? The truth is that the change in shopping behavior has been happening for some time, and COVID accelerated that shopping behavior to become a little bit more permanent. The biggest difference now between maybe even 5 years ago is that shopping, as opposed to being a planned activity where you scheduled it in your calendar and probably went into a shopping mall or a supermarket, has now instead become a continuous activity. You're shopping wherever you are, and you're shopping not just as shopping for the sake of shopping, but you're shopping in the background. You're also, every time that you're going on social media, listening to social media influencers, as you're looking at reading reviews online, offline, you're experiencing products in different stages of your purchase journey. So now shopping has moved to becoming a more, from a more linear sort of way to becoming a more continuous loop where you're shopping all the time, or at least you want to be able to shop when you please. Just to give you an example, 70% of the consumers, and I'll show you some data as we go to it, said that they shop in these so-called micro moments. Micro moments are the moments that are living between our everyday lives. These are the moments in between, what used to be distinct shopping activities. These are moments in between. These are small moments where we feel that we want to shop. So if you look at, for example, in the next slide, these micro moments across a variety of different industries, almost 70% of the consumers are saying that they're shopping in micro moments. And if they are asked to look back at the previous week that they shopped, almost 30% of them will say that they did shop in that micro moment. So it's a little, this trend is now more permanent than we think it is. For manufacturers, for retailers, it means that the initial way of trying to target a consumer very linearly, trying to establish what that purchase cycle is, when to target them in the purchase journey, has got very convoluted. You have to be near the consumer at every part of their journey, and the consumer is sitting back and saying, look, come get my money. But in order for you to get my money, you've got to make my life really convenient. You've got to make sure that as you get my money, you're giving me something back in return for that convenience. Whether it is a little bit of personalization, which makes me feel special while consuming your brand, or whether it's the ease of convenience and you coming to me, or whether it's about connecting me to a larger community of people who, like me, consume the same brand. That's what consumers expect in return for sitting back and giving you the money that they're very easily giving you. And this trend, today more than ever, is a lot more permanent than it used to be. If you go back a slide, Anna, the second thing that's emerging is the values with which the consumers are choosing to shop are becoming as important as value. You saw in Arvind's presentation how the evolution of Hula and the targeting of the younger consumer to some extent could be based on value. And we call those purpose-driven consumers. Consumers who are coming into shop based on a specific value, be it a price, be it a particular, value the brand stands for. I mean, I want to talk to this brand because it's an elite brand and I want to be associated with it. Or this brand appeals to me because, it's a sustainable brand and I'm all for sustainability. That's purpose-driven consumers. But a large number of consumers today are also value-driven. And value-driven basically are consumers who are buying the product or the service based on price and convenience. And price and convenience go hand in hand, which means that these consumers are wanting to consume a brand or a product or a category based on simplification that brand or category or product offers them. The third big pivot that we have seen as part with this consumer study is the fact that a lot of consumers, as part of being purpose-driven, are moving to more sustainable brands. We won't talk about that today, but really, if you go forward again, Anna, the conversation today, and a slide forward, is really around figuring out how do we attract, forward please, Anna. It's really around figuring out how do we attract our consumers in a manner that are fundamentally attracting them between those micro moments and values. If you go ahead, this is the other thing that when we talk about the value-based and the purpose-driven consumer, the other thing that's happened is the shopping channels in those micro moments have splintered. If you look at what was happening even 5 years ago, none of us it doesn't seem like a time too back in the past, right? But the primary channels where people were generally consuming your products were in the store, or at best, you were shipping them online to your home somewhere. If you look at what's happened in 2019, and this data is 2019, I suspect when we look at 2020 data, you won't even see the dark blue line. You are now moving to a situation where you're expecting the product to be delivered to you wherever you are, and you have the flexibility of buying it anywhere, either where you are, or either if you make, if you're going into the store, you buy it, but you want it to be delivered wherever you are. So one of the biggest things that's happened are the channels available to brands, from where the brands are selling to where the consumers are shopping, have become fragmented. But the underlying theme between these channels really is the brands need to come to the consumer versus the consumer having to go spend time finding the brand. And remember, a lot of product discovery that earlier used to happen in the store, as you would browse the aisles, you would see a shiny brand you've never tried before, you wanted to try it. All of that discovery is now happening online. None of us want to spend any moment or any second more than necessary in a shopping mall these days for the risk of catching an infection or being in a crowd. So all of that discovery is happening online. It's happening at your time. And if your brand is not where you're discovering the other brands, you're missing out on the on considering that brand as you go forward into the shopping mall or online as you make the purchase. As you go forward, Anna, the other thing that I talked about is look at the percentage of value-driven customers that have gone up in the last in the last year. I mean, we do this study year on year, and the biggest difference to us is the percentage of value-driven customers who are seeking value, either based on price or convenience, are beginning to form almost 40 to 50% of the total consumption base of any category or market. If you go on to the next slide, category by category, whether it's apparel, footwear, or food and grocery, or personal care, or furniture, the number of consumers who want to be looking at consuming these categories based on convenience and price have gone up. At the other hand, purpose-driven consumers have also gone up, which means consumers are looking to brands to embody and to sort of market the same values they stand for, which basically means there has to be a greater degree of brands coming to me, but brands also becoming more personalized to what I stand for in order for me to identify with these brands and hopefully then buy these brands, right? So these are some very stunning stats that have emerged only in the last 1 year. And we can see that the market's been moving here, but the numbers today create a compelling case for people who previously always used to cite legacy, a lot of heavy lifting, lack of options, as saying, look, if you don't do this, you're missing out on your consumers who may not then want to consider you in the purchase. So if you go forward, the other thing, as a result of this, so one of the status quo that we're seeing now getting challenged is really that if manufacturers and retailers don't do this, they truly stand the risk of getting locked out from the customer, the risk of being cut out and not being able to get directly in front of the consumers. And the more they stay away, and the more they're able, they're scared of putting in place direct-to-consumer strategies, somebody else, some other brand, or maybe another platform business, which gives these customers direct access to brands like these, will come and establish that connect before them. The other thing that's happening is that the same consumer now is fighting or rather is giving his or her data to a lot many platforms, whether it's payment gateways, whether it's people who are collecting data to do surveys. The earlier you are in the game, the more command you have on the consumer's data and how you look at leveraging, accessing, acquiring, and analyzing that data. So being locked out is a real threat that a lot of manufacturers these days are facing. We talked about the consumer preferences. We talked about the splintering of channels, which is, which channel do I now put all my activities to that will enable that the consumer buys me? Actually, the consumer buying behavior is now across several categories. And therefore, it's necessitating the need for us to start considering the D2C channel. And if you go on to the next slide, I think the results of some of the numbers, and many of you probably have seen these numbers, I don't even need to talk about them, but if you talk about Shopify's, everybody talks about Amazon, but if you just for a minute talk about Shopify's revenue growth, 86% year-on-year growth is tremendous. And the numbers they're talking about are not small. They're talking about, a 2.5 billion business, which has been built almost in the last 18 months, which is tremendous. If you look at the changes that we are expecting in ASEAN, the chart immediately below that, the colorful chart on the top, on the bottom right hand left bottom left-hand corner, you will see that, the orange line, the orange bar, which is talking about permanent changes to behavior, are becoming bigger and bigger when you go down that chart and look at online shopping. Basically, consumers are saying online shopping has become a prevalent and a permanent means of me to shop. On the right-hand side are some examples which have, caught a lot of our eyes and fancy. I mean, Arvind, you talked about Secret Lab. I ordered a Secret Lab chair at the peak of COVID because we wanted a comfortable ergonomic chair to sit on. The operating profit of this company in the last 12 months has grown 4 times to 52 million. And this is an ASEAN company we are talking about that has been able to expand its business both in the market and outside. If you look at the very bottom, Tesla, I mean, a classic D2C example, but it became real for most of us when we received, many of you, I don't know if any of you booked a Tesla, but when the booking started to come out and we all got notifications on our mobile phones that your Tesla is ready for delivery, the first thing we all did was download that application and start to design the car. I can tell you, including myself, there were very few consumers that didn't feel the thrill of doing something personalized for themselves. And it wasn't a cosmetic, it wasn't, a piece of clothing, it was a car. The fact that you could put together a car and then you were debating about, what wheels do I want? What kind of performance do I want? Do I want the performance to be 5.2, 0 to 105.2 versus 3.6? That is the thrill of personalization. And that only becomes real when when you begin to actually see a brand that's giving you that, that flexibility on your mobile phone. Closer home. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever, bought an Ox White shirt, but they're basically creating white shirts, standard white shirts to be able to bring to you. And the fact that they are now the largest growing e-commerce business or D2C business in Malaysia tells you that there is a market for otherwise items that we have not previously thought of getting to the consumer directly. My favorite, though, is Bombast, right? I mean, in the US, the fact that none of us are going to office and the fact that we're all roaming around in our houses, the need to wear socks to keep our feet protected is a classic example of how a product, which you would have never thought of becoming a star in itself, has now created a company which is now considered the fastest growing company in the US. I mean, socks, which otherwise cost a penny or so, are now a product which, is being celebrated as a direct to consumer. And the reason I talk about these examples, which many of you already know about, is not the fact that these are not known to us or these are new. It's the fact that across categories we did not previously think about, chairs and socks, or across big brands, when they come to you like a Tesla and make it all real around personalization, you actually begin to see the power of becoming a D2C business. So if you quickly go on to the next slide, what I want to do is spend a few minutes talking about what does it take to actually build capabilities to become a D2C business. For me, there are 3, and I talked about how D2C is a route to market. It's not e-commerce. It's really getting your brand into the market. It's really 3 things. It's about looking at the way you sell as converged commerce. It's not e-commerce. It's making sure that all the channels that you sell on are fully converged, come together, and that you're able to integrate, harmonize experiences and data across all these channels. The second bit that automatically you go to is you take that data, you put in place data platforms to be able to access and integrate that data, and then are able to use the insights which come with it to be able to generate value. And the third bit really, which is the most unique bit, is taking that to be able to inform your supply chains, but not just supply chains, inform partnerships, inform channel partners, inform marketers on how do you take that product and start selling, and what are the logistics that are needed to bring that product to the market. So if you go forward, you will see that when you talk about converged commerce, there are now multiple channels of engagement. So it is about making sure that you're giving to consumers a means across channels to acquire the products they want when they want, right? So making sure that your messaging, your brand is harmonized across all forms of engagement, right? Whether it's digital channels, it's offline channels. You've also seen in recent times examples of brands that were otherwise digital now beginning to open online stores, right? I mean, a great example of this is, to me, a Nespresso store, right? We've got Hook Coffee here, and they will violently agree with me. It's about being online, but it's also about establishing something offline, which gives you a sense of coming back, engaging with people who want to drink coffee, about coming and comparing the machines you have, thinking about, what are the ways of becoming truly a barista and, bonding over that experience. So that all of those become forms of engagement. Now, whether you do that in store, whether you do that through temporary stores like pop-up stores, whether you do that online, each and every form of engagement needs to be harmonized. There cannot be one or the other. They need to speak to each other. And by doing that, you start to then get access to what your consumer wants. Where is your consumer going? Where is this consumer getting the information from? And basically giving the consumer a 24/7 experience, which otherwise did not exist because that consumer was stuck in going to a store. The other bit that happens when you start to put together integration of your channels is you start to build together a fulfillment history or a fulfillment platform or a fulfillment profile of how do you need to make sure your product gets to your consumer across which channel and which channel is making money for you. Because when we talk about success stories in D2C, there are many failures as well. And a large number of failures in D2C happen because companies are not able to understand the cost profile of their business, which is, it takes money to get your product out. It takes even more money to get your product out across various channels. How do you make sure that your costs are kept in check and that you're actually calculating not only your profit to serve, but also your cost to serve? If you go forward, we also talk about, therefore, what are the 3 or 4 things that companies need to do to become fully D2C? The first thing I talked about is the converged experience, workflows. I mean, there is a lot of effort and emphasis that has been put on technology. I'll take a step back and say, before technology, you need to fix workflows or processes. You need to have an understanding of how your consumer map looks like, how your product will go from one channel to another. How will you engage with consumers across channel? This will require you to rethink your processes and make sure, Arvind, to your point, having the right people who are able to move away from just being generic sales order takers to people who become equipped to understand and read data will become very, very important. And therefore, they need to become part of how you redesign your process. How do you become closer to your consumer? And then when you do that, automatically supply chain will become one of your biggest differentiators while being able to set this up. I'll give you a great example. For those of you, for all of us who've been stuck in COVID, I turned to a slightly healthier diet during COVID, and I wanted to buy a Vitamix, those high-powered blenders, and they're not easily sold in Singapore. They command a premium in Singapore, and I ordered mine over Amazon. But I got alerts when Amazon shipped it to Singapore, and the moment it came to Singapore, it disappeared. And Amazon alerted me saying, sorry, your product's disappeared. I said, okay, and they reordered it for me. The same thing happened again. I have ordered the same product 7 times on Amazon, and the product comes to Singapore and disappears. I don't know whether there's pilferage in the system. I don't know whether there is fundamentally a breakdown of their processes. I don't know whether the product's not coming in through the channel because they already have, or they're establishing, a distribution center here, which allows them to be able to not want to sell the product to me through an alternative channel. I don't know. But as a consumer, I feel really hurt and annoyed when, after having put enough money, it's $1,000 of Vitamix. It's not a cheap product. After having done so 7 times, I still don't get the product. And nobody gives me the visibility as to where it is and why I haven't got it. It makes me really annoyed. So here is an example of a fantastic product which is failing me in the direct-to-consumer channel, right? So this is the reason why investing in alerts, control towers that provide you visibility into where your products are, where could there be disruptions, and alerting your consumers saying, hey, there is a disruption here, you may get it later, is very important. Great example, we've seen what's happened in the Suez Canal this month, right, this week. Clearly, there is going to be immediate disruption to a large number of categories that were on the ships that were behind the ship that was stuck in the canal. Now, if you're truly smart about keeping your consumers engaged, you send them an email or you send them an alert saying, hey, your product's going to be delayed because so-and-so happened. And that's great. Tesla gave me a call the other day and said, hey, now, the next thing that's going to happen is, somebody's going to call you for the payment, somebody's going to call you for this. I felt fantastic because they're keeping me engaged on every step of the buying behavior. So to me, getting alerts, both as the enterprise, as the company, and as a consumer, is really key. If you go forward, the other thing that, so you have to move away when you look at, very similarly on the left-hand side, you have access to all of these sources where consumers are currently generating data. And if you're a B2B channel, you are in those channels just informing the channels of what the needs are. Instead now, as you move to a completely direct to consumer focus, you need to start thinking about what the preferences are and design your entire factory to consumer model around understanding the consumer's preference, right? So, and make fulfillment as an underlayer to that, because without knowing the consumer's preference, you're still going to be, not being able, be in the situation that I was with some of the products that I've ordered, right? If you go on to the next slide, and forward, I'm just going to skip through a couple of slides here. If you go forward, please, one more. I also want to talk about what does it mean. So for manufacturers and retailers, it really means 4 things. Think about seamlessly integrating your data and investing in platforms that allow you to orchestrate messaging, orchestrate experiences across channels, right? Second thing is personalization is here to stay. I like receiving a little note which says, hey, thanks for your order. Here is something special for you. Every consumer does that. Personalization is extremely important. The third thing is ecosystems. For way too long, consumer companies have said, oh, I'm heavy lifting. I was in the, again, to age myself, I was in the era when there were 3 e-commerce platforms, and those e-commerce platforms created a business case by charging you for the revenue or GMV that you were generating, right? That's completely been disrupted. You've got on this just in front of you a whole ecosystem of platforms that can get your shop set up overnight, payment gateways that can get you, into your consumers' wallets immediately. And then not only that, but order management systems, fulfillment systems that are available as a service, which can help you set up very quickly. So use that ecosystem, because you cannot be good at everything. So use that ecosystem in a manner which is integrated to be able to get set up faster. And innovation has to be in the DNA of your company, and the ability for you to hire people who are not just account managers or field specialists, but people who are day in and day out thinking about how do they get closer to consumers is going to be in your DNA. If you go forward a little, please. So I just, again, I cannot stress the point around ecosystem partners enough. And whether those ecosystem partners are across payment or across marketing, customer experience, or logistics, you will have to make sure that these ecosystem partners are coming through on the capabilities and the processes that you set out, are enabled across the various levels of engagement, whether be it pop-up, vending machines, experiences. And technology today is vastly is enabled. So focus on what capabilities you need, what skills you need to develop those capabilities, and then what processes need to support those capabilities, because technology is available to harden all of the things that you come up with. If you go forward, and I am getting to the top of the hour, I quickly want to go through, next slide, please, through data. And really important point Arvind brought up. In order for you to become a D2C company, you have to start rethinking your employee experience. Your employee experience can, a lot of companies want to become D2C, but their employee experience is still very B2B. They're not thinking consumer, they're still thinking intermediary, they're still thinking wholesaler, they're still thinking middleman. So how do you use the data that's coming in to get your employees to start understanding that and the sophisticated insights that come with the technologies that you're deploying, right? And if you it is fact that the moment you empower your your employees to become driven by data, you see a direct correlation to revenue. So it's not just about getting your product out and getting new consumers. You also have to empower your employees to think a little bit differently, because D2C requires a very different skill set than the earlier B2B markets, right? And if you go forward, for most manufacturer, the organization of the past that you see on top, the field sales agents, the account managers, the sales rep, um, what they're doing today and what they're doing tomorrow will be very different. And therefore, when you're hiring these people and you want to build a D2C business, you need to start making sure that these people also are oriented and understand where your consumers are going to. Don't hire people who are B2B in order to go to a D2C business. And maybe a lot of the businesses, that have been born digitally don't suffer from this, but I can tell you that some of the world's largest businesses and companies that have legacy not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of the people, in terms of the employee workforce they have. And how do you make sure that those people are upskilled to understand the data and the processes that need to be rebuilt in order to support D2C businesses, right? If we go forward, you will also find that, one slide forward, please. You will find that just like I talked about the unified employee experience, you need to make sure that you're leveraging these data insights and telling your employees how to personalize, how to drive engagements, how to ensure fulfillment activities are done, how to be at the right, how to choose the right partners. So these employees then they focus more on where your advocates are versus focusing on, just the channel itself, right? So personalization is not only for the consumer, it's also for your employee. And it's really important that we focus on both to be able to become truly digital, direct to consumer. If you go forward, I did talk a lot. One more forward, please. I did talk about supply chain as becoming one of the critical drivers to direct to consumer. It is often cited as the #1 reason for not being direct to consumer. It's also a complicated area in wanting to sort of look at your direct to consumer investments, right? Logistics is, the truth is, supply chain today, especially more than any other time, is ever changing, and whatever policies and processes you put in place for supply chain today can completely go off, if you have events like COVID. What you need to ensure is that your supply chains are flexible and they are embedded in data so you can predict disruptions upfront. Demand sensing and ensuring that as you're predicting demand, which in itself is not new, most companies predict demand by the use of historical data. Or what we are basically saying is start to predict demand by looking at more holistic drivers to demand, which includes consumer preferences, which includes other hyper-personalization mechanics as to what's happening around you, local factors, weather, data, events, disease outbreak, which helps you get closer and closer to your consumer. I have a client in the US that during the peak of COVID included in their demand forecast factors such as closures, lockdowns, various incidents of disease virality in order to predict demand, which basically means they were getting closer and closer to where their consumers are because the consumers were not coming out and shopping in the usual places that they would otherwise predict demand from. The other bit about direct to consumer is inventory levels, and your inventory levels have to be leaner so as to not lock your money in working capital. And therefore, in order for you, once you're able to predict that demand and you get closer to your consumer, the inventory you carry and where you put that inventory, what channel you put that inventory becomes really important. So focus on supply chain order and fulfillment needs to be clean and lean in order for you to move. Now, I'm just taking it a step forward and saying, as you saw in the beginning, how many clients, how many consumers are talking about purpose-driven purchases. They want to see where their coffee comes from. They want to see where their leather in the bag comes from. And in order for you to do that, you will have to start thinking about tracing and tracking mechanisms, which get the point of origin of your coffee bean or the point of origin of, I'm making this up, but even, for example, to make sure that the people who work in factories that create iPhones, in order to make sure that you have ethical labor practices available to people at the push of a button. important. And technologies like blockchain, etc., do it. We're doing it across several categories already, and you're seeing this happen in areas where authenticity or counterfeiting is a problem, right? So, for example, things like alcohol, places like high-end fashion, where you're paying a per unit rate, or per unit price, which is high, and therefore demands you to know where these things come from. So embrace the needs of the ever-changing supply chain. Very quickly, if you go on to the next slide, and before I wrap up, one more slide, please. I just talked about this. If you bring it together, next slide. The benefits are clear. I think today more than ever, if we start to think about why we should do them, I think the question needs to be why not? And the why not is here for all of us to see. Companies with customer experience driving higher revenue has been proven by the financial data sets available to us. Customer experience leading to brand loyalty, again, is a proven fact. Investing in the right salespeople who further then drive revenue both online and offline is again proven through some of the recent statistical data that's coming in. Supply chain having a direct or the right assortment, the right channel, carrying the right levels of inventory, having a direct impact on your profitability is again a chosen fact. Now, the truth is, when you look at direct to consumer, you have to start looking at both your profit to serve and your cost to serve. And in order for you to do that and evaluate it as a valid channel to support your route to market plan, you need to ensure that you're putting your initiatives and linking them to a business outcome. So don't just invest in marketing for the sake of it. Choose the right channels, be at the right place where you expect your consumers to be, and invest in areas that are stripping off cost from the case for you to serve your consumers, right? So the benefit and the cost case for coming into the direct-to-consumer space has to be very clear for brands attempting this journey. It's not just e-commerce, which is relatively simple. A direct-to-consumer business requires a very different business model, and that business model must be supported by consumers, employees, and the investments you make in supply chain, in merchandising, in marketing, and so on and so forth. And if you go forward, I just want to sort of, just a 5-point action guide is really, be where you are, be where your consumer is, build in the capability of fulfilling anywhere, anytime, right? Any day, every day is the model that your consumers are living on. And therefore, you really have no other choice but to follow that if you truly want to be in their mindset. Use data and insights to drive customer experience, but also use that to reskill your organization. An organization that knows how to read data will be able to drive actions with insights, right? So remember that. Using technology to identify the right assortment, the right channel at the right cost to generate the right profit is really important. Make sure that you also understand the role of the retailer. The retailer for direct-to-consumer businesses is not your enemy. It could be a partner. It could be a way of magnifying your message, amplifying your brand experience. It could be a way of making sure that you, are everywhere that your consumer is, which is the reason why when many people try to put Amazon as a direct-to-consumer company, they get confused because Amazon can be a competitor. It can be a complementary business. It can be your supply chain model. It can be your direct-to-consumer partner. It can be your technology layer. It can be many things. So think of your ecosystem partners and the roles they play, and those roles will change at different points in the ecosystem. So again, goes back to making sure that you're mapping your processes very carefully and choosing the partners you want to be in each part of the process carefully. And then again, remember, it's not just e-commerce. It's about taking your brand to a market. So give it as much importance as it deserves. Don't jump headlong unless you know how to make money in this space. And in order for you to make money, you need to make sure that you understand your costs and your revenue drivers very carefully. So that was really, why we need to get into direct-to-consumer and some things to watch out for. Again, happy to take questions towards the end. But, this is a really exciting space. And I think all of us as consumers can relate to brands which are coming to us. And, this is really, really exciting because, like I said, you have the money. You want the brands to come and do a little bit of exercise for them to get that money out. And brands then need to understand what's the exercise they need to do to be able to extract a penny out of a consumer's wallet, and which is what makes this very exciting. So thank you everyone.